Welcome to We Are Libertarians, where our goal is to help you sound smarter while talking with your friends. We examine current events from a libertarian perspective while treating modern politics with all of the irreverence it deserves. We toss out the screaming heads and put people before political parties and give you context to the news to make you think. I'm Chris Spangle, and this is a special series on We Are Libertarians called The Swamp Explained. I'm joined by Rob Quartel, a 45-year fly on the wall in Washington, D.C., Rob has worked for Republican presidential campaigns, government agencies like the EPA, and has been confirmed by the Senate to the U.S. Federal Maritime Commission. He's also been a candidate for Congress and Senate, and given his experience and iconoclastic viewpoints, Rob gives us a great insight into the swamp that makes up our nation's capital. So it is great to be back from vacation. I'm a little slow, Rob. It's good to see you and good to talk to you, and glad that we can make this happen. How are things in your world out near the swamp? You're not in the swamp, I don't believe today.
Well, I'm not in the swamp today. I'm down on Gwynn's Island. It's a gorgeous day. I think we're supposed to have a temperature of an effective temperature of 110 degrees,
Ooh.
And the absolute temperature is around 99. But I also have a pool.
Good.
And the bay, and the pool is around 95 degrees, so it's like a bathtub.
Yeah, it's been around 105 here. It's been rough this week, and I was out in a cabin in the woods. Fortunately, I had AC in the cabin because I don't really camp, but it was brutal. I think that's part of why I'm just so sleepy today. I'm just very groggy, and this weather, I think, just makes everybody a little slow. So hopefully we won't be too slow on the program. I think, I don't like to talk a lot about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez because I don't want to have the Trump effect where you are constantly outraged by a politician, you constantly talk about them, you make them your permanent foil, and then all of a sudden that person gets elected president. And I would not like to see a President Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, but obviously she has been the center of a lot of news lately. There have been certain points where she and Ted Cruz have been agreeing about certain things. She's been fighting with Donald Trump, with her and her fellow quote-unquote squad. But you actually brought up something but when we were kind of planning this out long before all of the send her back tweets, which I'm sure we'll talk about, which was Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez saying something that that I personally agree with, which is getting rid of the Homeland Security Department. That's
right. And one of the things she pointed out was that when it was formed in the Bush 43 administration, an awful lot of conservatives, and in fact, probably the administration itself, were opposed to its formation because they worried about oversight, they worried about the size, they worried about whether or not you could deal with all the data that was generated. So she called it an egregious mistake, and an awful lot of people on the Republican side and conservative side, and no doubt libertarian side, opposed it as well, including people like Vice President Cheney and the president himself. But here it is, and when it was put together from all of the various agencies, Customs and Immigration Enforcement and Coast Guard and some of the security agencies, and on and on and on. And of course, they created the TSA out of that. When they put it all together, it was a total of 180,000 employees, which made it probably the second or third largest cabinet department. I'm guessing agriculture and DOD are bigger. But today it is almost 250,000 employees.
Wow.
So she said her proposal wasn't radical, and in a lot of ways it's not. So
let me ask you to clarify something. Bush and Cheney opposed the creation of Homeland Security, or I thought they spearheaded it. So do I have?
Well, no. What happened was it came out of the Congress, and I think actually the Democrats were the first to propose that. Everybody's always looking for something to say that they have taken some action to do something My recollection, it was actually Democrats who first proposed it.
Okay.
But it came out of the Congress, and the administration was very reluctant to do it. They proposed putting together 22 government agencies, one of which was the TSA, Transportation Security Administration, which, as you know, screens passengers at airports. That had been created right after 9/11. And, a year later, we had that and 21 other agencies, and it was proposed out of the Congress, and they put it together. So the administration was very reluctant to do that. And Cheney was known to oppose it. When they voted for it, my recollection is that it was something like 100, and I think it was a pretty large number of Republicans actually voted against setting up the new agency.
So from this article in the Washington,
so she's on to something.
Yeah, so in the Washington Post article that you sent on July 11th, titled "Ocasio-Cortez wants to axe Homeland Security, some conservatives didn't want it to begin with," she's quoted as saying to the New Yorker's David Remnick, "People sounded the alarm back then, and that these agencies are extrajudicial, that they lack effective oversight, and is baked into the core foundational structures of these agencies." You then have conservative political figures immediately castigated the Congresswoman's proposal. Karl Rove said on Fox News, "Moronic, stupid, naive, and dumb." Liz Cheney said, "Absolutely irresponsible." And this is Ari Fleischer said creating a cabinet post doesn't solve the problem. He actually opposed it back in 2002, and they go on to talk about kind of what you just said. But this is something that I've noticed about conservatives, and one of their great failures as a movement is that they fight something when it's proposed, something like Medicare or Social Security or the creation of the Homeland Security Department, and then, a generation or two later, they support it. It absolutely must be protected. We must protect Medicare, Social Security, the Homeland Security Department. They never seem to actually want to decrease the size of government when it was enacted 2 or 3 generations ago. And I think that's why a lot of people are very skeptical of the Republican Party, is because ultimately they just end up supporting big government and protecting it. And it turns into a bit of tribalism like we're seeing here, where just because Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez says it's an idea, we have to oppose this idea even if it would reduce the size of government because a Democrat said it.
Well, and that's right. So there are two pieces. Let's break that down because there's a lesson in it for our listeners. First, frequently when things like this are proposed, they're proposed as almost a panacea for a big problem. And of course, this was being proposed as a way of managing the security process, borders, and everything else after 9/11. So you have that, and it came out of the Congress, not the administration. So the instinct is to oppose anything that comes from another branch or from another party. So that's the first instinct. And when it finally passes, and the article also notes that there were 120 some congressmen who opposed it, of which about 10 or so were Republicans. But once it becomes a program, then there's a lot of money associated with it, and the committees. So you have this in the Congress, you have this whole restructuring of the committee process. Although, in fact, one of the problems for the leadership of the Homeland Security is that they have almost the entire time since that creation in 2002 or so, they have reported to the same committees that had oversight over those 22 different agencies, which ranged from immigration to security to nuclear proliferation and control of nuclear weapons and uranium and all of these things, all of which were, pieces of which came into the department. And so that becomes, they may have opposed it for political reasons or tactical reasons or whatever, but once it's there, they take advantage of the fact that it is there, and it gets them new authority. So they have committees and get new oversight powers and new budget powers and authorities. And so all of a sudden, they have a reason to live for this new agency.
Right.
And that is the swamp. AOC, who most of her things I can't say I agree with any of them either. On the other hand, I love the fact that she is the one person who controlled, and I mean TROLL, troll the president effectively. She's really good at it. And I actually thought her comments the other day were right on, and we can talk about that, when he went after her. But she's onto something here. And I think the fears of conservatives were that you're creating this big agency that is involved in collecting all of this information. It's Big Brother. And in fact, the very name sent tremors through some people in the administration too. Homeland, the word Homeland has all of these connotations of, the 1984 and all these kinds of, framing things in that way. So they didn't like that. A lot of people didn't like the name. I didn't like the name, I have to say too.
Shortly after,
I have to admit that I was involved in a part of helping structure the data side of it, which I regret.
Really?
During that period, I had already come up with and sort of sold in the idea of monitoring the border electronically or the container security, monitoring containers coming into the U.S., using that data to figure out what might be in a container and whether or not it was risky, and then going on to inspection. But so there are certain kinds of data elements that were already in the commercial and government data collection process. So a number of the people from the Senate committee writing the data collection provisions for the agency got together with me several times, and I ended up actually writing some of the language, which ended up in the bill. And in retrospect, it was just too broad. But of course, everybody's trying to figure out what you can do at that point in time to make sure no more terrorists get into the U.S. and things like that. But all of us had second thoughts, and I know. And here it is. It's a huge agency. It collects information on every aspect of American life, on trade, and now we have our facial recognition, which is being enhanced by some of the things they do there. That Homeland Security. You have a whole variety of very 1984-ish kind of techniques, which all of a sudden are real life. They're not fiction anymore. And Homeland Security is the agency which handles 99% of that, and in fact is the cause.
Yeah, so I'm looking
should be concerned.
Yeah, I've been concerned about it for a long time. I mean, the first sign, so out of this came what's called a fusion center, and the fusion centers are part of the reason that 9/11 happened, was that all these various policing agencies weren't talking to each other. So there's fusion centers around the country. There's one at the bottom of the State House here in Indiana, where the state police, the FBI, the local police, they all collect and process information so they don't miss things. And shortly after the formation of the Department of Homeland Security, there was a report. It got leaked, I think, in 2008 or 2010 from Missouri, where the Fusion Center said, domestic terrorism is the largest threat, and anybody with a Ron Paul or Libertarian Party bumper sticker is to be considered a national security threat. And it was a terrifying moment where you go, what? A person who believes in the founding principles of this country, if you are continually reposting the words of the founders, or the Declaration of Independence was censored by Facebook a few years ago, you go, that's a domestic terrorist now? That's a really scary place to be in history. And when you look at what's happening with the social credit score in China, and the possibility of that, eventually happening here, totally. you get your purchase of groceries at the store denied because you said you had a racist tweet in 2009. That's a scary place to be heading, and this has always been the fear of civil libertarians of any political persuasion, that DHS would be largely ineffective except at cracking down on our rights and eventually harming Americans. So there's an article.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's an
go ahead. So there is an argument, and as Slate pointed out, in their article at the time, conservatives and libertarians and Republicans were distrusted any government effort to protect Americans, quote, at the point of a gun and the touch of a rubber glove. And the second most common opinion was fear. And I think there are good reasons for that. And of course, it's also incredibly bureaucratic. So you can argue it's not very efficient. But again, this is the Homeland Security and the arguments and conversations around it are a very good example of how the swamp works, and both how it, from a tactical standpoint, how people get things done and sort of reframe things until they do get it done, and then from the operational standpoint, how inefficient and difficult things can be. I mean, in some ways, you should be happy because there's so many committees doing oversight that nobody can get anything done. But on the other hand, if the policy guys at the top can't get anything done, then that means it's just running in kind of overdrive underneath. That's what Trump also is fearful of, but doing nothing about, which is the fact that the bureaucrats in these agencies just run on they're automated in a certain sort of sense. So
yeah, so
anyway,
there is
this issue about abolishing ICE. ICE is a part of Homeland Security.
Right.
It's the immigration enforcement side. So you have Justin Amash saying, on the one hand, the House voted on an inane resolution regarding ICE. He says he wouldn't abolish ICE without an alternative, but there's no reason to treat a federal agency as though it's beyond reproach and reform. And then he points out that they're defending an agency as if it were something sacred, and it really has only existed since 2003.
Right. Yeah.
So
well, that's
anyway.
the Republican Democrat
so
way. Pass a bill.
AOC is on to something. We should not diss her all the time.
So this is a report from ZDNet in 2015, and this kind of summarizes a report, an oversight report by the Department of Homeland Security on itself, and the headline is Department of Homeland Security Oversight Report, DHS is a terrifying failure. Analysis, a report assessing the DHS since its formation in 2002 finds mission-critical failures across all 5 of the DHS sectors and struggles to prove the DHS is effective. And so if you go back and look at that, one key finding the article notes, the DHS spent $50 billion over the past 11 years on counterterrorism programs, including Homeland Security grants and other anti-terror initiatives. But the department cannot demonstrate if the nation is more secure as a result. Of course, admitting that the nation is more secure means that they lose their funding because, all right, well, we're secure. Why give you any money?
Well, you could argue, though, and I think they would be correct to argue that if they're doing something via their monitoring or other tactical kinds of things or strategic initiatives that reduce the likelihood of it, then you need to continue that. And so I think it would be legitimate to argue that if they stop certain things, we would be more vulnerable. But again, it's we're giving up an awful lot, and people actually don't know how much they're being monitored. And anytime, I think I go back, for example, to the Boston bomber, if you remember, at the marathon several years ago.
Yeah.
The police found the guy, the kids, the young men, in I think it was 2 days.
Mm-hmm.
And they did it by virtue of being able to track them through dozens of cameras along the route and other places, and information that was generated and put together, in a way that is exactly what Homeland Security does and their agencies when they're trying to do this stuff. And I think everybody applauded that they caught them, but I don't think very many people thought about the fact that they caught them because everybody is under surveillance.
Well, there's there's a TV show
and
called,
that's a problem.
Yeah, there's a TV show called Person of Interest that it's a true story basically about the network and predictability of human behavior, and it shows the kind of the net that is around American society. It's a very good TV show with Jim Caviezel. But that there used to be a saying back when I was a baby in politics and you were already a seasoned veteran, that it's for the children, and that was the justification for anything that the government ever did. And now The justification to do whatever the government wants to do is to say, well, it's in the interest of national security, so therefore we're going to do what we want, spend what we want, and not tell you about it, so we can't be held accountable.
Right.
And that's an enormous problem. And so to continue on with this article here, each assessment of the DHS 5 top missions, preventing terrorism and improving security, securing and managing our borders, enforcing and administering our immigration laws, safeguarding and securing cyberspace, and strengthening national preparedness and resilience, is a shocking litany of failures and incompetence, corruption, and disinterest, characterizing the DHS as an ineffective and inefficient program of questionable worth. The report says the DHS is, quote, lousy at cybersecurity, and stresses the DHS as a, quote, dysfunctional culture, end quote. And one outlined especially in an ominous section on DHS corruption. It details misspent and wasted money on spa junkets, 99% of chemical facilities uninspected, a range of cybersecurity failings, and a nation protected by largely untrained government contractors who literally don't know what to do if someone leaves a bomb outside a federal building or pulls out a gun and starts shooting. The DHS spends more than $700 million annually to lead the federal government's efforts on cybersecurity, but struggles to protect itself and cannot protect federal and civilian networks from the most serious cyber attacks. So,
and I should point out on that point. Well, there are a couple of things embedded in that. On the cyber thing, by the way, I think it's probably worth. I have had my clearance stolen twice from the Office of Personnel Management, which is a government agency. It's not under DHS, but DHS is supposed to be creating standards and driving and leading in this category here. A lot of these things, though, I think part of the problem, and that litany of things that he rattled off there, is that they actually have too many tasks to handle, and you really can't handle all of these things.
Yeah.
So one wonders if you had 22 agencies rather than one gigantic one, with all the management problems that come with size alone, would they be any better at doing it? You can't know. But for example, the fusion centers, which you talked about, those, I would push back on whether those are good or bad or indifferent. I think in concept they are the right thing to be thinking about. There's in this early period, people did not have a good ability to see what was going on in the environment around them. So, and put the pieces together. And of course, that's why they wanted to build an agency in the first place. So, for example, you might get data from the border guys that something is happening here as an incident, but they would not have been able to connect it to data out of another agency that was watching specific people for some other purpose that was, they were nefarious operatives or something else. So this issue of being able to connect data, that's what the fusion centers were about. It was intended to be a way for the local police, firemen, all of these first responders, as they now call them, that they didn't used to call them that either, to get information and coordinate it. So when 9/11 happened and everybody was responding to the towers, you had everyone on different frequencies for the radios. So the police and the fire and other kinds of responder units really couldn't talk to each other all the time. Some of the frequencies overlapped or were the same. They could communicate directly, but this is what the fusion center concept was, which is get everybody on the same page.
Well,
literally.
Yeah, and you can also trace back the 9/11 attacks to the CIA not sharing information with the FBI because of pissing matches.
Absolutely.
They
right.
wanted, and that was part of the goal of this organization was to help alleviate a lot of that. The Department of the not the National Security Advisor, but the Dan Coates currently occupies that office where he's the head of intelligence and coordinates a lot of that. I think that office may have been created after 9/11, but I don't know for sure. But that was part of that was part of the goal, was to make sure that those kind of failures don't happen anymore.
Well, and there was actually an article, I can't recall, it was the Times, or I think it was the New York Times this week, a couple days ago, a totally different subject, but which illustrates the same problem, which is, we're celebrating, as we do this broadcast, the 50th anniversary of the landing on the moon.
I was watching the right stuff before we started the program.
Good. And one of the articles was about the weather. So I was actually in college. I was a midshipman on the USS Carrier Wasp at the time. I watched it go up from the Officers Club in Newport, Rhode Island. And then they flew us, the midshipmen, over to Rotterdam, where we picked up the aircraft carrier, which was the flag carrier for the whole fleet there. And we sailed to Oslo for a couple days, and then we sailed off to the middle of the North Atlantic. And our ship was the alternate pickup vessel had they not landed in the right spot. And so I was very interested in this, and it did land pretty close. It landed about 250 miles off of the original landing spot. And the reason was because the meteorologists figured out there was going to be a major storm in the originally planned landing spot. But the story, and it's a great example of government agencies not sharing, was that there was a spy satellite that was up there, and the military didn't want anybody to know it was up there, and they didn't want people to know it was taking pictures, and they didn't want it to know they didn't want it to take pictures of clouds. But a guy there looking at the information realized that he was seeing a major storm develop in the pickup area, and what he wanted to do was contact the NASA meteorologists, who would not have this data, but he could not contact them and tell them he had it, because no one was supposed to know the satellite was up there collecting the data in the first place. And it turns out that fortuitously he ran into the senior guy, I think with NASA. I don't have all the details, but it was a great story, and you can look it up and straighten it out. But who happened to know about the satellite too? I guess he'd been in the Defense Department when it went up or something. But so they had to check to see whether he could get the data and information about the storm, and they basically he commanded the pickup vessels to begin moving to the new pickup location 250 miles away, and to get it in motion before they had cleared it with NASA, and before NASA had gotten the information that they were not supposed to have. So it's a great example of everything in government is compartmentalized in the security side. And of course, that's what a lot of people who supported the formation of the department wanted to get over, because, as you know, and as the report, the follow-on reports to 9/11 said, it was a massive, massive lack of handoff and insight and ability to scrutinize people and information coming in to actually prevent the event from ever happening. And there are people who believe you could have prevented it. I suspect most people believe you could have prevented it. But all these things come at tremendous cost. Benjamin Franklin is said to have said that liberty, once surrendered, are never freely returned.
Right.
And I think that's probably correct. And every day we surrender something. And of course, I think the facial recognition is the scariest part of everything. Virtually everywhere you go, your face is being recognized and compared to the databases. And now we find that the FBI and others have millions and millions, 200 million, I think, records of drivers and their faces. And it's of course.
I just got my passport, and as the the photo that she took was a little askew, and so she modified the photo to kind of match up with all the lines. And I'm sitting there looking at how she's matching it up in the passport database, and it's measurements, and here's where the eyes, and here move this point to the cheek here, and we're building a digital panopticon, and we have to be really careful about it. And nobody seems to be terribly worried. And the panopticon was a prison where basically there was it was in a big circle, and you had the cells, and the prisoners all faced each other, and then there was a tunnel and like a way to kind of look down on the prisoner. And so the prisoners all went insane, clinically insane, because they never knew when somebody was watching or not. They were they never had any moment of privacy. I mean, there's even the most extroverted amongst us, like myself, need that afternoon where you're just alone and not talking to someone and not watched. And there's the reality that we're constantly being monitored is it's a scary proposition for the future. And far be it from me to. I've always been an early adopter of technology, as I know you are, but at what point do we start to become the Luddites and start going in and smashing the machines to impede progress? I don't know. I wonder if we'll get to that point, or if all these dystopian futures like Terminator are going to eventually come true. Yep, that's absolutely. Well, we move there a little bit every day. Mm-hmm. So you mentioned but again, yeah. Go ahead, finish, and then I'll move on. Again, my big point is that that this issue of information sharing and analysis and everything else, it's not just, of course, a Homeland Security issue. It's been with us a long time, and the issue is, where does it begin and where does it end? Yeah. So you mentioned AOC's gift at trolling, and I believe that everybody is smart at something, and even if someone is a particularly not bright person, they may be good at something. And I think that AOC and Trump share the same genius. I don't feel that Trump or AOC are particularly bright people as in terms of book learning or intellectual firepower, but they have a singular gift in trolling their opposition and getting media attention for themselves. I think that so there's been a recent spat where Donald Trump basically said along the lines, sure anybody listening to this program's seen the tweets, but along the lines of these four, Ilhan Omar, Presley, AOC, and the other one, I forget what I'm not sure of the other member of the quote squad's name is. That they hate America and that they need to go back to their country of origin. The problem is that only Ilhan Omar was born in Somalia and is a naturalized American citizen. And so you had the President of the United States effectively saying, if you disagree with me, then you should be deported to 4 American citizens. And the veiled, I don't know about you. I won't force you to associate with my belief, but I do think that there is a xenophobic, racist element to it, that if you disagree with my version of America, which is inherently white, and then you need to be shipped back to your home country. To me, it's undeniably racial. I don't know if Donald Trump is a racist or not, but Donald Trump is certainly very comfortable, if not intentionally uses racist language. And I think that this particular incident was planned. I think that he is smart enough to know that he has the 4 people who are liked less than he is in America. Ilhan Omar, according to Axios, has a 9% approval rating, and he wants them to be the face of the Democratic Party in 2020. And he knows that if he elevates them, then it helps his reelection chances, because then he can say, do you want them to be in charge of the country? And scare those moderates into voting for him, and independents and moderate Republicans in 2020. But he knows he's not going to get coverage if he doesn't do something. If he doesn't do something crazy, so he used something that was I have heard "Love It or Leave It" from 2004 on, working in talk radio. It's nothing that is going to piss off his base. Let me send you in a little bit different direction. Okay. So I was a teenager
in the 1960s, and I was draft bait when I got out of high school in 1968 at the height of Vietnam. So for people my age, the first reaction is Vietnam, because that was what the people who defended our involvement there said. If you opposed it, love it or leave it.
Right. Same with Iraq.
And
when I was
a
teen.
the really, for all of us out there and many voters, the biggest chunk of voters who actually vote, which is baby boomers, love it or leave it, has a very different meaning than it does now for the squad. Although, and I certainly understand what they're saying, and I certainly agree with them. I do think it's divided. I don't know if he actually thinks so hard about what the implications are of what he says. Of course, there's a kind of when he says something like this or tweets it, and the left gets riled up. His base basically views it as there they go again, not there he goes again. Right. There they go again, and he's trolling. He's trolling the Democrats, and of course people say, well, he actually united the Democrats, got Pelosi out of a bit of a bind, because earlier Pelosi had and the four young women had all kind of been in a spat where they were as she said, the only votes. There are only 4 votes against a piece of legislation that they were trying to get through, so he, in a way, he sort of united them all, but he, at the same time, he is definitely riled his base. And of course, the Democrats, and again, this is the swamp where people are almost incapable of acting independently from whatever their brain tells them. Their knee jerk is what always prevails, their gut. And the gut for the Democrats was to jump on it and define it as racial. And I think it visually is racial. And racist, but I don't know if he actually thought that far along. I think and of course now the papers report that, and I know it's true, that everybody in the White House on the staff, of course, they were all very concerned. They could immediately see the effect it would have, and jumped on reframing it. And the reframing now is that he's not really talking about them. He's talking about their views, which are un-American, and they don't love America, and blah, blah, blah. And of course, again, for my generation, anyone who was around during Vietnam, that's exactly the way the opponents of the war were framed. And most of them were young. Most of them were college students, and just out of college and everything else. The protests were driven out of the colleges. The deaths, some of those were in colleges on campuses. Of course, the deaths were actually in Vietnam, but people who died during protests were at colleges, universities, and so we react in a negative way too. It almost doesn't matter what side you were on during Vietnam. When you hear "love it or leave it," that is kind of one nasty leftover epithet from the 1960s and early 70s.
Well, I can tell you, having been in college in the early 2000s in the lead up to the Iraq War, I mean, that was anybody on the left basically was told, if you don't agree with going to Iraq, then you need to go you need to go somewhere else. But the idea that they should go back to their home countries, what he actually said, we're kind of transposing "love it or leave it" in that mentality. But I mean, he's basically saying to women of color, go back to your home country. You don't belong here. And the idea of that they're un-American. I mean, far be it for me to defend these 4, because I have nothing in common in terms of my ideology with theirs, and I think that their tactics are as grotesque as his. But the idea of they're un-American is completely subjective. My version of Americanism is different than Donald Trump's, is different than Ilhan Omar's. I mean, if Donald Trump or if Barack Obama had stood up in front of a crowd and said Dinesh D'Souza is un-American and we need to send him back, The right would have lost their mind as they did when Barack Obama used the IRS to persecute them. You know, it's all grotesque, and it's clearly he knows Donald Trump.
Become used to it.
I believe that Donald Trump knows exactly what he's doing. I don't think that he's a dumb man. I don't think you become president of the United States being an idiot. I always thought that about Bush. I think that that's just the easy explanation that Donald Trump is an idiot and therefore he's absolved of what he's doing. And I don't believe that. I think Donald Trump knows that every American has made up their mind as to whether Donald Trump is a racist or not. And so he can traffic in this language because he's not really held accountable by the Democrats, the Republicans, or the media. You know, the Democrats flail with outrage, the media flails with outrage, but the media is cashing all of those checks from advertisers because of all the press that he gets them. He knows he's going to get whatever coverage, whatever he says is going to be on the front page of the news, and he knows that if his
solid base is growing, it's 45.5%.
The Republicans
and it's in all the right states, and right now he's on a glide path to be reelected.
Yeah. Because the Democrats didn't learn their lesson, as we talked about, I think, in the last episode. Right. The idea that and he really knows that his model works for Omar and AOC. Now, the difference is Donald Trump does have some ability to keep his mouth shut. You saw that during the Kavanaugh hearings. He was nowhere.
Right,
and
that's right.
AOC and Ilhan Omar don't have that ability. They say that Omar gets up there and immediately just says everything wrong that most of America will immediately go, this woman is insane and a radical. And he wants them, he knows that the Democrats that he's going to run against are inherently kind of weak and are playing the game and pretending that the presidency is some highfalutin office. But he knows that AOC and Omar, as the faces of the Democrats from here on out, only benefit him. And, I think he wants to fight them.
Yeah, and but he's fighting them now. He's turned that from his racism, or what Democrats like to frame as a racist statement, and I think it is. Effectively, it is, intentionally or not. And I don't know if he intended it to be that way, but it is that way, and I suspect he is himself that way. But AOC and Omar are, I think they're both intelligent. I think you have to wonder how well informed they are. AOC has been very effective in the committee hearings in which I have seen her in her questioning. She really is. She does get to the heart of that. And she's obviously a very smart person. Smart is not always completely educated. And of course, and Trump may be smart, but we know he didn't know how government worked. But the two, AOC versus Omar, AOC, I think, she has been more careful and thoughtful about what she says in her own position. I recall early on after, I find it bizarre I'm defending her, but I'm not defending her.
Me too. I know.
I'm not defending her position.
I'm mad that I have to defend Ilhan Omar's right to free speech, but that's what you just got to do.
But and they do that at right, and one has to assume that they represent their districts. So that means they represent, by the way, voting American citizens. So that's why you have to be respectful of all these people, and that's one of the worst aspects of life as it is today, which is that people are really very disrespectful of other people's differences. And now, of course, what this really resembles most of all is back in the 18th century political press and late 17th century political press, where the newspapers originally were organs of one political point of view or another, and only in the 1820s or 30s did a newspaper finally come around that at least pretended not to have an ideological point of view. I think it's an issue of respecting the people who elect the representatives. And, the next election will be a test. Omar and AOC will be back out there again in front of their constituents. And if they win, then that is ought to be taken as a serious reminder that there are Americans all across the political divide. And now, on the other hand, I think that if you did a bell curve on every issue, you would find that 80% of Americans are within plus or minus 5 points of some center point on almost every single issue. And this is where I think the Democrats are getting themselves in trouble. You will not find that level of agreement on reparations, for example. You will not find that level of agreement on single-payer health care. You actually find an immense amount of agreement around the middle, plus or minus 5 or 10, on immigration solutions when you get to specific ones and polling on that. But, we're letting, and what Trump's trying to do in the Republican Party now, and I saw Karl Rove had a piece too, is we want the extremes in both parties to define the parties, and they don't. And the problem with what Trump has done is that he has turned this into the Trump party. It's no longer a Republican Party or a conservative party or any of that. It's really, as much as anything, movie star worship.
Right.
Well, which means you can't have a conversation about it. And oh, by the way, when the 4 women got up last week and talked about it, I think AOC's framing of it was correct, which is that the president cannot argue the content of any of his programs or policies, largely because he doesn't have any. But if he had one, he couldn't argue it. So he goes after the person and people and makes it a personal kind of statement. And that's, I think she is correct. And I think the way she said that, gives me a little more respect for her intelligence, because I think she was trying to not let them frame it in personal terms any longer. They're going to have to work pretty hard at that.
Yeah, go watch Network. It's on Netflix right now, and there's the scene where the young blonde comes into the craggy old news director's office and basically says, she's really she's the entertainment person for the UBS network, and she's like, I've already seen your newscast. It's all basically fluff, anyways. Let me put Howard Beale on the air screaming, BS, and we'll have a rating sensation, and that's what happens. Because at the end of the day, we really want our ears tickled. We want to see the train wreck. We want to watch the drama. Donald Trump and AOC give us what we want, and so therefore we give the ratings to the news outlets, and CNN just goes, okay, we'll give you exactly what you want. I mean, people don't want... how many people look at our episode lengths and go, I really do want to understand this issue in full detail, but I don't want to take 2 hours to understand it. You go, okay, right. Well, then you're more susceptible to being propagandized and, misdirected and disinformed because you don't want to do the homework. You want the sensationalism. You want to argue whether or not Donald Trump and AOC are racist. And we're really kind of living in a period of time where people are abdicating their responsibility. Congress is abdicating their responsibility. And the voters are really at this point the only one that can hold Trump accountable. And I don't know that they're going to, because I don't know that they're ever going to want to go back to a presidency that's staid and solid and respects in some respects I do like Donald Trump as president because he's completely eroded the myth of the presidency and deleveraged people's notions of that being an imperial office. I think, in some ways he's peak demagogue for this country, and that's bad, but in other ways he's deleveraged the power of the office and the mythos around it. Well,
but that is his attack on people. I think for me, probably the worst part of the last several days was when he was on the White House lawn, I think yesterday or maybe Friday, and he said that people can't criticize America, not when I'm president.
Right.
And of course, that really, really, really reminded me of the 1960s and early 70s in Vietnam. That's for me, and I think anyone who's a thinking person of whatever stripe, you really want to be able to be critical, self-assess, and it doesn't mean you love the country any less. So it's tough. Now, all of this, of course, this is all leading to the campaign,
Right.
And your listeners, our listeners might say, sir, what does this have to do with the swamp? Well, the swamp is all about power, and frankly, the swamp is about a lot of inside jokes and pretensions of value and all the rest of this. So, where Trump is you said that, for example, he's not. He's demythed the imperial presidency. I think in some ways he's sort of turning it into the imperial presidency by saying no one to do it on my watch,
right,
kind of thing. But he has demystified some aspects of it, and I think some of it went too far. So you may recall that I don't think I think Ronald Reagan and George Bush II, none of them would ever walk in the Oval Office without a tie on and their suit jacket buttoned, and in honor of the office. Well, I think I get that, but that's just, if it's your office, you ought to be able to put your feet up on your desk.
As the guy that would wear cargo shorts into the Oval Office out of disrespect, I'm a fan of it.
Right.
Did you ever think that you'd see a day where San Francisco liberal Nancy Pelosi, as Rush calls her, would become the moderate wing of the Democratic Party?
It is amazing, isn't it? But I do think she's demonstrating, and this is where I've never much cared for her as a politician, but I think in this year she has come into her own, beginning with everyone may recall the spat over the State of the Union when Trump she disinvited the president. And of course, she had the right to do it, and he sputtered. But in the end, he really had to bow to her on that, and he got to do it eventually. But it was on her terms, and she has done that repeatedly. And you can walk all the way back to the Oval Office meeting where he turns around to her before the new Congress and says, "Well, something like, well, Nancy, you can't do anything, yet. You just don't have enough power," or something like that. And she said, "Well, let me instruct you on how power is structured here in Washington, Mr. President," kind of thing. And he has been a naivete at that. And a lot of the people he brought with him were naive and still are to this day about how these things work. Now, if you want to break things, and I'm in technology and startups and all those things in my real life. I'm perfectly happy to see things being disrupted. And I have to believe you probably are too. And a lot of our listeners are, even though they may be conservative at this stage. There are a few things that do need disruption in the political structure. And so he has done that. But one would hope that there would be a new technology or a new app or new something out of this administration that would address the problem that they're disrupting. So, all of this is in search of winning in 2020, and there have been a spate of articles and talking heads on the TV and the radio talking about how each side is sort of hoping it's going to help or hinder the other. But I thought one of the most interesting in the last couple of days was one in the Times, which says Trump's electoral college edge could grow in 2020, rewarding polarizing campaign. And what it points to is that today, and certainly into 2020, the mostly white working class Rust Belt states, which decided the 2016 election, continue to be the core of the electoral map and the electoral college. And while his ratings are generally higher down in Sun Belt, in Florida and Texas and all that, they are very high in the Rust Belt. And so, for example, you go to Minnesota, Wisconsin rather, which was a surprise to some, although I predicted it would go for Trump. His approval rating is actually higher now in the net than it was in 2016. He's at 47.1% in Wisconsin, which is higher than his national averages. So you take this state by state by state, And he has a clear advantage in the Electoral College. And there was another article that made the analysis that he could lose this time not by 3 million, but by 5 million, and still win via the Electoral College. And I think that's something that people need to be concerned about, and the Democratic Party needs to be concerned about it. And I think, frankly, if you're thinking, again, as someone from Washington looking out, do they need someone from California on their ticket? No, they don't need 3 million extra votes there. They need 30,000 extra votes in 5 other states to win the Electoral College. So to me, that suggests that the Democrats are going to have to bring in somewhere on that ticket someone from the Midwest, if not 2 someones. And of course, Joe Biden is from Pennsylvania, which they really need. And even though he's from Delaware, Pennsylvania claims him. Well, he was from Pennsylvania, but elected for so many years in Delaware, he moved there. But Pennsylvania still claims him. And, you've got Buttigieg and Amy, what's her name?
Klobuchar.
Klobuchar, yeah. And some of these others from the Midwest. And I think we need to watch those people, because if the Democrats want to win, that's where they're going to have to go for votes.
All right, well, let's wrap up. Let's do the Diner's Guide to D.C. Rob loves to go out and carouse and
well, and actually, as we've told our viewers, listeners, that I moved from Logan Circle down to my house in Chesapeake, but then got a little pied-à-terre in the Navy Yard, which is now up and coming, and there are lots of interesting restaurants down there. But there's a new one. If you would like, there's so many great restaurants now on the water in Washington, and so many more than there used to be. There's a Salt Line down near the stadium, and All Purpose, which is great pizza, and Italian and others, and Whaley's and so on and so forth. But the newest one is called Schilling's Cannery and Schilling's Canning, and it is just a block off the water, looking across an open space to it. It's a young chef. The family used to be a canning company, and he's from Baltimore. And we had fabulous soft-shell crab and a number of just terrific dishes. And it's both meat and vegetarian and vegan and seafood, and he does a great job. And I think this restaurant, Schilling Canning Company, is going to be a big hit. And if you're going to Washington, you should make every effort to go do that, and then spend the evening wandering around, looking at the boats and fountains, and walking the bridges there on the waterfront in Washington.
All right, very good. Well, it's been great to talk to you. This has been a very good episode of The Swamp. Make sure you go back and listen to all of the episodes. Just search in the feed Swamp, and you'll find all of our previous episodes. I especially love the episode where Rob talks about his experience with Bush 41. It was a great episode. So always look forward to doing these. We're trying to do them every 2 weeks, Rob, but we typically get once a month. But that's
once a month. Yeah, we'll get better.
We're two busy men, and so it's hard to link up sometimes. But always enjoy talking with you, Rob, and I appreciate you sharing your insight with the audience.
Yep, and I enjoy it too. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.